All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is slightly after 3. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar presented to you by NCLA's Resources and Technical Services section. My name is Kristen Calvert, and I'm the current chair of the section. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can go to nclaonline.org/rtss. We're really excited to talk to you today about the impact of the pandemic on our collection development and libraries. We have 4 great panelists here, and they will introduce themselves shortly. We're going to take care of some housekeeping things. If I can multitask at the same time. We ask that everybody, all the attendees, keep themselves muted and their videos off for the sake of everyone else on the call. We are recording this session, and we will send out the recording after we're done today, along with a feedback form for everybody. We accepted your questions at the registration process, and we're going to be asking our panelists to respond to those today. If you have any clarifying questions you'd like to ask them about their answers, feel free to put them in the chat, and if there's time at the end, we'll take any additional questions that we have from you. So I'm very excited today to have everyone here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And start at the top with Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Moore, and I'm a school library media specialist in Wilmington, North Carolina at a little school called Castle Hayne, which is in a small place, but it's a big school. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Tanya Jones, and I'm the Collection Development Supervisor at Gaston County Public Library. And if you don't know where Gaston County is, we are next door to Charlotte, Mecklenburg.
Hi, I'm Shannon Tennant. I am the Coordinator of Library Collections at Elon University, which is we're now mid-size, I guess, private university in the middle of the state. We're between Greensboro and Chapel Hill.
And I'm Roger Cross. I'm Director of Technical Services at University of North Carolina at Pembroke. One of my duties, of course, does include collection development.
Thank you all for joining us today. And let's see, so our first question has to do with budgeting. We'd like to know more about how the COVID-19 situation affects libraries' overall budget management. For instance, have you changed some of the funds for print resources to electronic? Why or why not? And why don't we start with Tanya?
Yes, we have had to manage our budget a little bit differently. I'm not going to say that we've pulled anything from print, though. We have found money for our electronic resources from other places. For example, we had buildings that were closed for 2 months, so there were some savings in utilities from those line items. We've also, as a public library, we have a lot of programming, money that we build into our budget for programming, and we have no programming going on physically, in-person programming for the rest of this year. So there's some money that we've been able to shift around in our budget to cover the increase in usage of our electronic resources such as Hoopla and North Carolina Digital Library.
How about Jessica next?
In school libraries, we have no control over our own budgets in most cases. We rely very heavily on what the principal gives us or doesn't give us. Some counties are lucky enough to have a line item in the budget that they're given from the county, but I think at most schools kind of across the state, there's not a lot of money to be moved anywhere. So most of us don't have a budget, and we're relying really heavily. In the spring, we were relying very heavily on things that we could find online for free. There were a lot of vendors that were offering their products and services for us to use for free through the end of the school year. In New Hanover County, we are using Class Project a lot. We have a partnership with our public libraries. So our students can use their databases for free using their student login. So through Class Project, they have access to the North Carolina Kids Digital Library and Hoopla and World Book and some other ebook services. So that's, we're not spending any money really, because there's not any money to spend.
How about you, Roger?
We haven't actually had much financial impact so far. What we've seen is a 2.5% cut, which was offset pretty much by our vendors freezing their costs for this coming year. The word of mouth is that we had to prepare for crisis contingencies. I had to prepare a budget that would take into account a 5, a 10, and 25% cut. Word of mouth, or whatever you want to call it, is that it's going to come after the elections, and we're going to face potentially drastic cuts because no one wants to cut before the election. We'll be facing them after the election, and that could change things. But as far as changing our funds for print to resources, those are all sort of merged into the same fund code anyway, so we haven't had any problems there.
Shannon.
So in some ways, we're a little similar to Roger in that we also had a small budget, well, relatively small budget cut. Every department was cut by 5% this fiscal year. And we have also been told to prepare sort of lists should we later in the academic year be asked to cut another 5, 10, significantly more. So what we're doing with our budget is actually holding some in reserve in case we have to give some back. Our budget isn't actually divided by print and electronic, it's divided by subscription and one-time. And so our subscriptions are substantially our databases. I mean, that's the enormous portion of our budget. But we have cut back our few remaining print subscriptions. We got, print monographic serials on standing order. We've cut almost all of those. Our travel guides, obviously, don't really need those right now, unfortunately. But in our one-time budget, that is typically where we were the liaison librarians, and we're supporting their faculty by purchasing books. And that purchasing has shifted almost entirely. So instead of purchasing print, we are trying to purchase ebooks, electronic versions when possible.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to question 2. Resource recommendations. So we're interested in exploring streaming video packages and would like to hear what the panelists might be subscribing to at their institution. Let's start with Roger this time.
We have Canopy, which we've seen a lot of growth there, especially once the classes moved off campus. We also have feature films for educators, which it's not vast, but it is a very nice resource. It doesn't cost per use, for example. I mean, you just have those. And then finally, we have Jove. I don't know if you know Jove. It's a journal of visual experimentation, I believe. It's predominantly for our nursing and biology departments. And then, of course, there's the NC Live provides films for the humanities, so that's good as well.
Tanya.
We have Hoopla, which has TV and movies streaming. And I was just looking at numbers before I came in here. And when we closed down in March, I saw a doubling in our usage for the streaming video on Hoopla that lasted through July and has now dropped back down to January, February numbers, because we are open now. Our hours are limited, but we are open and people are able to come in and browse and pick out DVDs. So we also have NC Live films on demand. They're not utilized quite as much. And there are some videos on North Carolina Digital Library that our patrons have access to. But really, Hoopla has been a standout this year for us.
Shannon.
So yeah, I just want to give a huge shout out to NC Live for their films on demand. That's fantastic. The fact that they've added HBO content is also fantastic. No Game of Thrones, unfortunately, but their documentary content is fabulous. We also have Canopy. When we got it a couple years ago, we had it wide open and that quickly ended. So we have it locked down fairly tightly by mediating it. And that does cost a lot of staff time and labor because Canopy is so readily discoverable out on the internet. We are fielding a lot of requests. We only purchase Canopy licenses for faculty and staff for classroom screening and for official university events like film festivals and whatnot. We also, just in December, had signed on with Academic Video Online from Alexander Street. And that has actually been really great because a number of the requests we've gotten through Canopy, we have been able to find that we have already paid for in our subscription to Academic Video Online. And we also just have started partnering with DocuSeek. We had a couple faculty members who had DVDs, but could not use them because they had, we're teaching in person, but there's so many students who are out because of quarantine, who have accommodations to be remote. So we were able to get online streaming with them. And so we're going to be sort of offering DocuSeek the way we offer Canopy, sort of on request.
Jessica.
In schools, like I was saying, we have a partnership with our public library. So our students can access some databases through Class Project, which is the name of that partnership. So we have NC Live, not NC Live, but the North Carolina Kids Digital Library and Hoopla and Tumble Books that they can access through Class Project. And the Libby app for North Carolina Kids Digital Library and Tumble Books and Hoopla, those apps were all installed on the student iPads that were sent home with them at the beginning of the school year for any student that requested a device. Some schools have subscriptions to Bookflix, which is through Scholastic. A lot of librarians are using Pebble Go, which is through Capstone, and lots of teachers use BrainPop. I've used a little bit of everything and sent it out to my kids in multiple formats. Some things need logins, some things don't. Obviously, the things that don't use logins get used more. Stuff that's easy to connect a link to something that I've sent out to them. But something that I've been seeing that's been used the most is a lot of teachers, at least at my school and kind of across the county, have been using Bitmojis. And anything you can link directly to a Bitmoji and they can click on it and open it and it automatically reads to them. I've found that the usage has skyrocketed just by giving them access to those direct links. And those aren't always available when you're using a subscription. Even though we keep pushing those subscriptions out to them because they're such great things, but having those direct links is something that they use more than anything else.
Moving on to question 3. So what have you found to be the most popular databases or electronic resources since the start of the pandemic? And has anything surprised you? So let's start with Shannon.
This feels like being on a game show. So streaming video usage has not gone up the way we anticipated. And I think it's because our students are mostly using their personal subscriptions to Amazon Prime, to Netflix, to Hulu. So the only viewing we're seeing are of the academic content films. But what we have really noticed a huge increase in is our ebook usage. We have ProQuest Central, again, thank you NC Live, EBSCO eBooks, JSTOR. We also just subscribed just before the pandemic to O'Reilly, which are the Safari, a lot of computer books, but also just so much more in that collection. And that's been very heavily used by some of our graduate school programs. And then we also have a specialized, for our health sciences graduate school programs, ebook database called Access Medicine that has a lot of Macmillan textbooks. So yeah, even though we had stayed open and even when we were closed for maybe 2 months and provided a grab and go service for print books, But so many people either can't come to campus, don't want to come to campus. The ebooks have just gone through the roof.
Jessica.
In school libraries, the things I see being used the most are Epic. A lot of classroom teachers are using that because they can assign specific books to their student at their level. Tumble Books has been popular in just what students are comfortable with for a long time. So I see Tumble Books used a lot, and it's that app is installed on our iPads. And I think another thing that teachers are using a lot is just doing their own read alouds. Probably gets used more than a lot of services, either Epic or just their own read alouds. They record themselves reading a book and send that out through their learning platforms. And we've been so lucky to have so many publishers and authors grant permission to do those read alouds and publish, post them on YouTube and things like that. So our students can have access to those. But we don't really find, I think most schools don't really find that ebooks are all that popular. We've been in school for 3 weeks now. In New Hanover County, we've been back at school in Plan B for 3 weeks now. And I've seen my kids far more excited than having a physical book in their hands to check out from the little cart I bring around to their classrooms. But Epic and Tumble Books are probably the two most popular online services that my students are using.
Roger.
This one will be a little difficult for me to really evaluate because we migrated to a new system last year. So I don't have a background, or I don't have enough data, because Academic Search Ultimate is what we use by default. And if that drops off, I'd be very surprised. I haven't noticed any kind of shift to any of our medical databases or anything else that's really more COVID specific, but then we're not a research institute. The thing about ebooks, we have had good usage in the past, but for the very first time, no matter what I did, I could not get professors to order ebooks. And for the very first time, all of the requests now coming in have been for ebooks. And so it's like I don't want to say this is a good thing, but for the ebook usage and awareness, it's been very beneficial to seeing the real value of ebooks for our classes and our courses.
We had one, or actually more than one or two professors who in certain more conservative book-based departments who had really resisted ebooks. And when they were in lockdown, they did not have a choice. And they aren't terribly enthusiastic, but they are so much further along than we could have possibly expected with ebooks. Yeah. That
is exactly what we're finding as well. I'm now buying books on poetry as ebooks. So that's really, it's amazing.
And Tanya?
We saw an increase in Ancestry Library Edition, which was made, they made accessible from home for free for people. And that was really, really popular with us here at the public library. We also saw just last month with NC Kids, our use just skyrocketed. We also have a partnership with the schools we call it the WOW card, where they can use our services, our digital services, using their student number. And beginning in September, I think the report I saw that was from the end of September, we were the second only to Charlotte-Mecklenburg in usage in the state for NC Kids, that's huge for us because we're nowhere near second in population. So we're seeing a lot of usage because of the hybrid school situation. Kids are in school 2 days a week and virtual the rest of the time. So we're seeing a lot of NC Kids.
So question 4, troubleshooting. Has access to the electronic resources that you do have worked smoothly for you? And let's start with Roger.
Absolutely. We've had no problem with accessing electronic resources as long as you have computers at home. And we live in a region where even some of my staff do not have home broadband or cannot connect to the internet. So we have been, if people can get online, everything's fine and good, but we have not, many of our students go home and they're in an area where they just have no way to connect to the internet and to our resources, which is, by the way, why we never shut down. We kept the library open throughout the entire, well, we've never shut down. So the reasoning being, people, if they're working off campus or have to do something from home, they're just not going to be able to connect to our resources. So as a result, we remained open the entire time.
Tanya?
I'd like to echo that. We've had no problem with the access to the electronic resources, except for not everyone has access to the internet. So we have left our Wi-Fi has been up and running the whole time, and we've extended our reach by increasing broadband, especially out in some of the branches that are in the more rural areas of the county, so that if you have a device, you could at least come into the parking lot of the library, whether we're open or not, and access the internet that way.
Shannon?
Thank goodness, actually, things have been very smooth for us. Our systems librarian took another job in March, and it is very unclear when we are ever going to be able to fill that position again. So I have been in charge if something goes wrong, and my knowledge is not that great. It's usually, well, try turning it off and turning it back on, or clear your browser cache, which actually works a remarkably high percentage of the time. So we have had a few easy proxy issues. We are not using the NC Live hosting. We are reliant on our campus IT to troubleshoot that, and we are not always their first priority. But really, mostly everything's been good. And I would say, like Roger, I would say most of our students do have access to devices and the internet, but we did have several staff members that we really had to scramble when we shut down and worked remotely for 2 months. It's a challenge.
Jessica?
I think school systems had a big challenge at the beginning of the school year, making sure they got a device into every student's hands. That was a big issue for like the first month of school, making sure every student had a device, making sure they had hotspots if they didn't have access to the internet. But actual electronic resources, I think we haven't had any trouble accessing them. I think the biggest obstacle for students, especially elementary school students, is just keeping track of all their different logins, a login for whatever learning platform they're using, and to get into class project or the different databases, I think is the biggest obstacle to them. And I think that's why teachers rely so heavily on things they can put a direct link to. Some other little glitches that we've had in school systems is that a lot of teachers have been using Safe YouTube to get rid of the ads and stuff off of YouTube videos. And I don't think they were ready for that influx of videos from us. And we've had some issues with that. And the solution, at least in my county, the solution we've had for that is instead of using Safe YouTube, instead of using Google Drive for hosting videos, the county was able to purchase My VR Spot for all the teachers in our county. So we can put store all of our videos there before we post them into the various places they need to be posted. So but overall, it's been pretty smooth.
And you all touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything else you'd like to elaborate on, do you have any way to meet the need for electronic sources for people who don't have the internet or a laptop? Feel free just to jump in, whoever feels like it.
I will. One of the things, as I said, we stayed open, and there was as well broadband broadcast out to the parking lot. But one of the things that the university did for staff and faculty, and especially in these areas that had no broadband, was to buy and then distribute hotspots So they've sent, there's been quite a few people who have been able to connect, but using hotspots, and sometimes for staff, laptops and screens and other things as well. So
Here in Gaston County, we allowed, once we had the staff back in at the end of May, we did allow patrons to make computer appointments and come in and use public access computers on a very limited basis, as long as they were wearing a mask, and they had to go through a screening, a health screening, to get in the building. So we've been allowing that since basically the very end of May. So.
In New Hanover County, we gave all K through 4 students an iPad that they could use at home. Students in grades 5 through 12 were given a laptop that they could use at home if they requested one. And then hotspots were given to students who expressed a need to, or who didn't have internet access. So I think, you know, a month into the school year, all of our kids are settled and have a device that they can use. And here and there's a few devices left over that if there's someone that's having issues with their device, if something breaks, there's a help desk that parents and students can call if they need help with their device. Something's not working for them personally, or if something breaks and it's just not working at all and the help desk can't help them, they can bring those devices back to school and trade them for a different device.
So at Elon, we have an office that is located in the library, though it is not part of the library's administration, called Media Services. And that is a department that checks out technology, including laptops, to students. Like I said, the majority, I knew I would get a phone call. The majority of our students do have laptops, but we actually have, of course, some students do not. And a really large population that does not have laptops is our athletes. And they came back to campus early. There was the optimism that we would still have fall sports. And so they had to make special arrangements to make sure that they could have extended checkouts. Normally you could check out a laptop for a couple hours a week so that they would have semester-long access. For our staff, the technology office provided laptops for people who did not have laptops to take home when the couple months that we were closed. However, the university did not provide Wi-Fi. There you were on your own. And we also, before COVID, we're open to the community. Anyone could walk in with a driver's license and use our public access computers. And that has been shut since March, and it's unclear when that will go back. However, fortunately, our public library is offering computer access and also has hotspots that can be checked out.
We definitely saw that here. Even if people had internet access, it was low quality, and they've run into issues with streaming, with virtual meetings, with classes. So
actually, we're running into an issue now. We have so many students in quarantine at local hotels, and so they're off campus, so they aren't using our fairly robust Wi-Fi. The hotel Wi-Fi is not really accustomed to having, 400 guests all trying to Zoom a class at 9:30 on the same day. What are you going to do?
So question 6. So how has limited access to the physical collection impacted your ability to maintain, assess, and weed the collection? And Shannon.
Well, I can be fairly quick on this. We don't really have limited access to the collection. Even during the months we were remote working, we had people who were designated as essential staff, our ILL staff, our circulation staff, myself, who came in. We did have a couple months where we were receiving our book shipments, our purchases, but we're not able to unpack them. But then we went back to full staffing June, except for people with accommodations, on June 1st. So then we just unpacked all the boxes and processed all the materials. We are seeing an impact, I guess I should mention, with our interlibrary loan, because so many libraries are not lending, are not open, or not lending physical books. A number of our best partners, in fact, here in the state. So we're able to get books, but they take a little longer because they're coming from out of state.
Roger.
very similar to Shannon, actually. We stayed open, so we haven't had any real problems accessing the collection. Interlibrary loan, however, was shut down. And during that period of time before we shut down, but COVID was still new, our ILL staff would quarantine our packages and then wipe down individually each book that came back, or so we were taking extreme precautions in the beginning, and then ILL just pretty much the entire UNC system seemed to have slowed down or stopped in many cases. So other than that, we haven't taken any weeding projects, or anything like that. But the collection is available physically if you're on campus.
Tanya?
Just like Shannon, I haven't had an issue with accessing the collection physically, and it's been a great time to weed because we're closed to the public for the most part. So you can get up there and get into the stacks, pull books, and not have patrons following you around asking, where are you going with those books? What are you going to do with those books? So it's a great time to weed. And although we were closed for 2 months, we did have essential staff here, so we were able to receive shipments. I only have one vendor that really kind of shut down for 2 months also, so we were able to receive shipments, get them out and cataloged and into the collection. So we really have been rolling pretty well on that front.
Jessica?
In school libraries, it varies drastically from school to school. During Plan C, I had some extra time in my schedule since nobody was using the library, that I could do some of that weeding and maintenance and shuffling stuff around. But now that I've moved to Plan B, I don't see my library for most of the day. There's a lot of school libraries that have the students of teachers in the library during the day. I know several school systems were providing that service to their teachers. Teachers were allowed to bring their own students to school with them, and then they are in the library or in another room in the building. So a lot of libraries are completely shut down because they're being used by teacher kids that are in the library. That's their classroom all day long. There are a few libraries that are open and students are using them. Sort of. They are usually limiting the books that they can pull from as far as space and keeping students spread out. But at my school, and I know a lot of other schools, students are not allowed in the library at all. And so I'm taking books to them. And so I'm not in the library to do any other collection development responsibilities that I have. So I know that's a big restriction for a lot of libraries in a lot of places, because someone else is using their room or they're on a cart giving their services to students in classrooms.
So given the likelihood of ongoing budget fun times, how do you think that you'll be able to recoup the losses in the collection from COVID? Especially if anyone had to stop purchasing altogether this past year. Tanya?
I don't see that we've had a lot of losses. There's some slowdown in publishing. There were a lot of things that got pushed back, and hopefully we'll still have enough money in the budget to purchase when they do become available. But as of right now, my budget's not been impacted, and not seeing a lot of loss. Jessica?
I don't think school libraries will be able to recoup those losses at all. A lot of budgets were frozen in the spring and in the fall, just because there were so many uncertainties about what needed to be bought by the county, by the school. What would we need? How much would we need as far as PPE and cleaning supplies and things like that. Some schools do have their own budget. Some schools are still getting that budget now that things have settled down a little bit. So I think some schools will, kind of keep that status quo, but a lot of schools rely very heavily on book fairs and grants for their fundings. And a lot of grants aren't available from certain companies. I know one grant that I write every year is still available, but the amount of money that they can offer is a lot lower than it used to be. And of course, book fairs have been canceled, especially face-to-face book fairs, just because of social distancing and students aren't allowed to come to the library, have those big events like they used to. Most vendors that do book fairs are offering drive-through book fairs and virtual book fairs, and they will sell you books in any way that they can, but in most of those cases, the profit is a lot less or not at all. So I think that a lot of schools would take a big hit just from not being able to have a book fair.
Roger?
At this point, we're not facing any kind of massive loss that isn't kind of a typical. Again, 2.5%, which was balanced out by the vendors freezing their costs. Though we have, since we're on a continuing resolution, I expect a 3% decrease in purchasing power every year. So I have dropped a few items that we had subscriptions to that had very low usage as a way to give me sort of a hedge. But if they're talking about 25%, there is no hedge. I mean, if they're talking about 5%, we can handle that. But they're talking about 25%, it's sort of turn off the lights and go home, and because we really wouldn't be able to recoup that kind of a loss.
Shannon?
I just will add one thing. I have asked all of our vendors to invoice us immediately so that if there is a cut, then we've already paid. And as a result, if there's a rescission in funding, that's not going to be fun. There won't be funds available. Now, when I say all of our vendors, I mean all of our really essential ones that we couldn't afford to lose. And if we're in multi-year contracts, that can cause devastating repercussions. Sorry.
Shannon?
So we are continuing to buy one time, both physical and ebooks, just relatively few, and we are prioritizing resources for teaching and resources to support DEI initiatives, which is an important push on our campus. And so we are telling faculty, is this a need or a want? And we are really pushing back on books to support faculty research. The university as a whole has really prioritized teaching, definitely for this semester, probably for this year. Service responsibilities have been dramatically decreased. There's language in the faculty handbook about for people who are going to have to go for promotion and tenure. The fact that, again, research and service are de-emphasized. So we are likewise de-emphasizing our collecting. That being said, I have a feeling that if budgets come back, the faculty will still have their wish lists. And if we had the money, we would be able to sort of then work through those. Like Roger, we have also canceled some of our lower use and high cost per use databases. We haven't actually canceled anything, but we have declined to renew. And I have to say, this is sort of some right sizing of our subscriptions that probably needed to happen. We have been fortunate. In some ways, being private means we're somewhat insulated from the state budget issues. That would also mean that we're on our own. And so there were some things that, yeah, we really didn't need. We have also been doing hard negotiating with all of our vendors when the new contracts come, asking for a 0% increase, and then negotiating when they come back to try to keep costs down as far as possible. But, again, we also We're not buying new collections. We're not adding new databases despite some requests, but we have a wish list. And if and when the budgets rebound, we'll be ready.
Just to clarify, I didn't mean canceling. That is true. We chose not to renew. Thank you.
So question 8, has anyone noticed what archives and local history departments are doing in response to the pandemic? Are we seeing an increase in digitization as a result? Is anyone having any observations here?
So our archives at Elon has a very small staff, and we are down a position that did a lot of the digitizing. We also relied heavily on our student employees for digitization, and at the moment we don't have any student employees in the archives, so that has decreased. But our archive staff is working on digital finding aids and putting up really cool digital exhibits using software like StoryMap. And also our archives is working very hard to collect materials to document the COVID pandemic. We had someone who sort of harkened back and said, so what did Elon do in 1918 during the Spanish influenza pandemic? And so we were like, it'd be great if we had more stuff. So that is one of the projects that we've been working on, is trying to collect what's going on now so that we'll have it for the future.
Did any of your libraries do any emergency scanning at the beginning of the pandemic? And how did you deal with any sort of copyright thoughts? We had a lot of students who had been home for spring break and didn't have their textbooks, and there was a lot of, I need to scan from reserves.
We did that in the spring, but we did it, we were careful of copyright. We didn't scan more than 1 or 2 chapters of any book. And yeah, they just had to do the best they could within the copyright legal restrictions. So I believe our bookstore also made access available to e-textbooks, because we were in a similar situation. It was around spring break. We had students who suddenly left campus and then realized, oh, I left my textbook in my dorm. But yeah, we were able to do that through the student bookstore. Luckily not through the library.
So that was our last prepared question. If anyone in the audience has a question they would like to put into chat, we have time for 1 or 2 more. So while everyone is typing, I will ask, have any of the changes you made in collecting your services in response to the crisis seem like they're going to last? We've seen faculty members suddenly like ebooks. We've done a lot more shipping to distant students. We've done things that we never would have done before. So is there anything that you've seen in your library change that you think is going to stick around long after we might eventually be able to shake hands again?
One of my fears is that we are getting by without 3 staff positions right now, librarian positions right now. We had, I think I mentioned, our systems librarian took another job in March, just before the pandemic. We had a retirement, and then we had another staff member leave. And I have to say, I really wonder when we're going to be able to replace those positions. And I have a feeling that when we do, they will not be in the forms that they were. I think they're going to be reapportioned, and I think we're all just going to be trying to do with fewer people.
I am hoping that ebooks do have greater exposure and have greater use in the future and are adopted by professors more than they have in the past. I think that this has given professors, it's been an eye-opening experience. I think back to, I don't know if any of you remember, back at the turn of the century, there was still a debate going about whether we should have print or digital, and the arguments against digital was there could be sun flares or there could be electromagnetic pulses.
Y2K.
Yes, so we should all have print. And turns out what really happened was we had a pandemic and then most people couldn't get into the print material. So maybe a more willingness to adapt to digital will be an outcome.
I think once the pandemic is over, a lot of librarians and teachers will go back and, will be ready to go back to doing things face to face and less digital. But I think that this pandemic has forced librarians and teachers to put all of those links and logins and all of that information in one concise format, so that it's easy to disseminate that, to put that information out to students, so that whenever there is a student who really does love ebooks, we find that most of our students prefer a paper-bound book, but there's also those students that have really thrived with that digital format. And so now that all of that information is collected in one spot, it's easier to put on our websites, or send out to those parents or teachers or students at the beginning of the year. So it's kind of one-stop shop, and this is an easy place to go to find all these subscriptions that we have, or all of these databases that you can use. And then I think teachers and librarians, just for instruction purposes, have had to digitize so much of their curriculum and their content and their books, just to be able to make it available to students. And I don't think that teachers will rely on that as a teaching method when things go back to normal, but I think they will have that as an extra tool in their tool belt, to help those kids who need something extra, or kids that are on the lower end that need that reinforcement, or be able to send stuff to kids that are sick at home. I think now that we've been forced to digitize all that information, I think we'll be able to kind of use that as an extra bonus when we get back to normal.
One thing at Gaston County Public that I was really happy about is when we were closed down, we didn't want to charge fines, obviously, for returned items. So we went fine free, and that's going to continue. We're now a fine free public library, which is great. And another thing is that now that we've been through this, we're going through this, we have a model to provide service for homebound patrons that I'm hoping we will continue with, because we've been doing virtual cards, digital cards, to allow people from home to get access to our digital services. And I'm hoping that we can continue to provide that to people in the future.
I was sort of thinking about on those lines too, Tanya, about how I certainly didn't have a Zoom room before the pandemic. And I think some of these technologies that we've been forced to learn are probably going to change how we do businesses, how we have meetings. Right before the pandemic, I must have had 4 vendor visits in February. It was almost like they knew what was coming, and they all were like, oh, so can we come the 3rd week of February? I'm like, But again, I think their budgets are taking such a hit. I think this may be the end of the, the vendor comes and they take you to lunch and try to woo you. I think we're going to be moving a lot of business that we do into these online platforms now.
And a question from chat. Who belongs to consortiums and which ones? We like Carolina Consortium, and we're going to start working with a community college consortium with Overdrive.
We belong to the Carolina Consortium. It's great.
We belong to North Carolina Digital Library. That's an Overdrive consortium.
So we belong to Carolina Consortium, which is, yes, fantastic. I cannot say enough wonderful things. And sort of for us, NC Live is a bit of a consortium because we're private. We have to buy in, and we choose to do that. We are in a regional consortium with the academic libraries in the sort of the 3-county area, but it has not really taken much of a form. A lot of meetings, but not a lot of tangible results yet.
Okay, another question from chat for the colleges in particular, but do you work with your bookstore or on your own to provide textbooks for those who cannot buy? And has that changed at all with the pandemic?
Unfortunately, at Elon, that is not work that we've been involved with. It's through the bookshop, through various scholarships, the Chaplains Fund, things like that. I will say my colleagues in reference have really been exploring OER. I'm afraid we're not cutting edge adopter, but this is something we're definitely interested in. And I really think that might be another positive impact of all of these forced digital learning, is that more and more faculty might be more willing to adopt OER textbooks and to investigate and maybe even help create these resources to sort of avoid having to have a physical book. But no, we don't. We do not provide textbooks.
We're in the same, I'm going to echo Shannon here because that's the same for us. We do not work with the bookstore. In fact, that's sort of viewed as we would be entering into competition, and we're not really, that's not our role. But we are looking into and have been including into our catalogs OER, so open access textbooks, etc. But we don't, typically we do not provide textbooks for students.
Yeah, like Roger, we are not, I think by our contract, are not permitted to compete with the student store. We couldn't afford to buy all the textbooks, even if we wanted, well, even if we wanted to. We do, well, pre-COVID, we had physical course reserves. And so we would have faculty members who would put a copy of the text on reserve. But I have to say, the circulation just really did not justify that. You know, you thought you were doing the students a favor, they still never came to get it. And at the moment, we're not doing physical course reserves. So it is possible and quite likely that faculty are scanning things and putting them up in their, we use Moodle, their course management sites, but the library is not involved.
So I don't see anything else in chat. So I will thank everyone for joining us today to listen to our presenters and to thank our 4 panelists for their wonderful contributions and for taking time out today. After this concludes, we will make it available to everyone and email you. If you would like, we would appreciate any feedback on today's webinar. You can also go to our website and see past recordings and past programs that we've done and find out more ways to get involved. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for coming, so to speak.